Hello everybody! First of all, let me wish you Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of you from sunny southern Portugal. Today I'm going to be talking, it's going to be a lot of talking about long exposure photography. This is a topic I love, and as you might know, this is a technique that I use a lot in my work and for good reasons. There are going to be 2 episodes. I'm going to be making 2 videos of this topic. Today's is the first one. I'm going to be talking about the camera gear that we need to take long exposures and about the technique, how to actually take them with both digital and film. In the second video, I will be talking more about the creative side of long exposure photography, about the subjects, how to choose good subjects for long exposure, exposure times, all the effects and things that we can create with long exposure photography and all the possibilities that it has to offer. Also, a few weeks ago, I published an ebook about this topic, about long exposure photography. I gave it away to all the subscribers in my newsletter, and today I'm making it publicly available to everyone. So I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. You can go there and download it for free. It contains pretty much the same information that I'm gonna be sharing in this video and the next one, but it's gonna be it's in written form. It might be better structure and everything. So if you prefer books, head down to the description down below and get your copy for free. Now, without any further ado, let's talk about long exposure photography. We know photography is all about light, specifically about how much light and for how long. We control how much light goes through the lens using the aperture, and we control for how long with the shutter speed. The shutter can open and close very fast or very slow. Depending on the subject, different shutter speeds can have a dramatically different effect in our pictures. Take this coffee mug, for example. This is the coffee mug shot at 1/4000th of a second. This is the coffee mug shot at 1/60th of a second. And this is the coffee mug shot for half a second. Now, take this dog as an example. This is a black dog shot at 1/4000th of a second. This is the same dog shot at 1/60th of a second, and this is still the same dog shot for half a second. As you can see, when we combine moving objects with slow shutter speeds, things start getting a little bit different. Objects get blurry, they become shadows, so they completely disappear. Things can get really crazy when the shutter speed is low enough. Not half a second, but maybe 5, 10, 15 seconds, or even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 10 hours, why not? In order to take long exposures, we are going to need a few things. The first one is an obvious one, but just in case. A camera. You could use almost any camera for long exposure photography, but ideally you want a camera that allows you to control the shutter speed manually, and even better if it has a bull mode. So for example, this one has a bull mode. Bull mode means that the shutter is going to stay open for as long as we have the shutter button pressed. A tripod. So almost goes without saying that the camera needs to be still in the same position for the whole long exposure. And yeah, you could use like a surface, like a table or a rock or your backpack for that kind of stuff. But being realistic, the tripod is the way to go here. The bigger and the heavier, the better. But I've taken long exposures like the other day, 40 minutes on this tripod. This is like $20, and it's not the most stable tripod, but if it's not windy and the surface is stable enough, this can do the job. The third one is some kind of cable release. So I have this one for the digital camera, I have this one for the Bronica, and we want this because we don't want to be pressing the shutter for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We just use this cable that will do that job for us. The last one, and probably the most important one, along with the camera of course, is that in order to expose our film or digital sensor for extended periods of time, we're gonna need some kind of, sunglasses for our lens. Because just think about it, if we wanted to take a long exposure of 30 seconds in bright daylight, that's going to be completely overexposed. It doesn't really matter the settings that we dial in the camera. There is no way that we can get a proper exposure with so much light. So we're going to need ND filters. As I said, ND filters are just like sunglasses for your camera. So the same way that you can barely open your eyes when it's really bright out, and when you put the sunglasses on, you can actually open them again. The same thing happens with ND filters and your camera. This piece of glass blocks light and is going to allow us to expose our film and digital sensors for a long period of time without overexposing our images. Now, this is where long exposure photography can get really expensive. I have Lee filters. This is the brand. There are multiple brands out there. There are cheaper ones and there are more expensive ones. Each of these filters, I have 3, 6 stops, 10 stops, and 15 stops. Each of them work or are usable or suitable for different situations. Are like $125, and then you need the holder. So the whole thing can get a little bit pricey, or you can go the really cheap way and route. I got started in long exposure photography using welding glass and rubber bands, and I used that for a long time, for a few months, and I could be still using that today if it wasn't because of the Bronica. So the Bronica is a really long camera. It doesn't really work with rubber bands. I kept breaking them and I broke some glass too. So that's not a situation that I wanted to be in. So that's why I made the investment, because I knew that long exposure photography was going to be something I was going to be doing, and that's why I got them. But if you are just getting started, I would just recommend you or encourage you to go to your nearest hardware store and buy some welding glass, because they are just like $5 to $10, and you just use some rubber band around your camera and you got yourself a nice kit of ND filters for very cheap. And of course, it's 2018 and there are many other ways to create long exposure images. For example, there are apps for the phone that can do it for you. You just have to hold it and they do some kind of magic and they combine a lot of exposures in just one. Or you could take manually hundreds or thousands of exposures and combine them on the computer afterwards to create pretty much the same effect. But that is really a big pain, and it's much preferable to do it in camera. And that's what we are going to be talking about. Yeah, let's go out and let me show you how I go with long exposures of both digital and film. Okay, so we're at the beach now. I'm gonna show you how I go with long exposures with both my digital and analog camera. But first, let me talk about this. This is the adapter ring. This is the ring that comes with the kit when you buy the ND filter, and it's the holder is gonna attach to this ring. What I did, I bought a big one. This is 77 millimeters, so it fits most of my lenses or all of them. And what I did is I just bought step-up rings for all the lenses that I have. So this step-up ring, it goes here and it works for my 2 lenses in the Bronica, and this one is another step-up ring that works with my zoom lens for the digital camera. So what I do is I just attach this one here. The reason why I do this is because these adapter rings, for some reason, they are really expensive. I think they are like $50–80. I'm not really sure, but it's way more than I really want to spend on something like this. So this way, it's a little bit of a pain to have to do this every time that you use a different lens, but it's just okay. And now we can put the holder here. So this holder is the single reason why I bought this, or why I changed or moved from using welding glass to a more professional, dedicated ND filter system, is because it has these 2 slots and you can just slide the ND filter in here and it stays, it's stable that way. With the welding glass, I would have to use the rubber band, so it doesn't really work with zoom lenses like this one, because the rubber band would be pressing. I would make the zoom lens to go back this way and retract, so it doesn't stay at the focal length that I wanted it to. So this is much easier. So it is very bright today, so I'm just gonna go right away for the Super Stopper. The Super Stopper is just a name that Lee Filters calls this filter. It's a 15 stop ND filter. 15 stops is a lot of stops. Let me check. So a 15 stop ND filter blocks pretty much all the light, like 99.9% of the light. It's like a very strong sunglasses for your camera, and it lets through the lens only 1/32,000th of the light. So yeah, that's why we are gonna be able to use this ND filter to get long exposure times even under this very bright sun. In this case, my camera is telling me this is gonna be 1/750th of a second, so it's a very fast shutter speed. And use the tables. I have an app for this, so that is telling me when I use an ND filter like this, 15 stops, the shutter speed will become 40 seconds. So 40 seconds means that we're gonna have to use bull mode, so I need the cable release for that. Before setting up the ND filter here, one important thing that we need to do is to change to manual mode, and we need to dial in the settings that we had before. The shutter speed is gonna be boob, as I said, and then the aperture is gonna be f8, ISO 100, and now we have to focus. I use manual focus all the time, even with my digital camera for this. So I focus before putting the ND filter on there, of course, because after you put it there, you're not gonna be able to see anything. So everything is in focus now. I have the right settings, and I have it to bull mode, and now is when we can just put the ND filter in there. Okay. So two more things before taking the shot. The first one is I like to use a delay of 2 seconds before the camera actually starts taking the exposure. I use a cable release, so it shouldn't be necessary, but just in case, 2 seconds is not gonna be a waste of time for me. I'm gonna be here waiting for 40 seconds or even longer. So 2 seconds is not a big deal, and I just prefer to make sure that I'm not adding any vibration to the camera. And the next one is that digital cameras have a problem with long exposures, and is that the sensor heats up, and that creates some noise over time. So they have a mode that is called a long exposure noise reduction. What that does is it takes the exposure, for example in this case the 40 seconds, and when it's done, it takes another exposure of the same length, like another 40 seconds, but just a black one. And they do that to create to isolate or to take a photo of the noise that the digital sensor is creating from that heat, and then it's gonna subtract them. It's gonna use that second photo or image to subtract that noise from the original exposure. If you have that mode in your camera, I would recommend using it if your exposure is gonna be any longer than 10 to 15 seconds. It depends on your camera. This camera starts showing a lot of noise after 10 to 15 seconds. So I have it there. It's a little bit of a pain because if you're doing like really long exposures, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it's gonna effectively double your time. So a 5-minute exposure, you will have to wait 10 minutes before you can take another photo. So it's a little bit of a pain, but believe me that you don't want that noise. It's gonna be very hard to remove afterwards. So yeah, just use that mode. We are gonna need something to actually measure the time. So I'm using my reliable Casio watch that I love. So cable release, now 1, 2, and the camera starts, and I start the timer here, and we just need to wait for 40 seconds.
Hey, hey good girl, hey good girl.
Okay, 40 seconds, we stop the exposure. As you can see, the camera now, it says processing because it's taking that second exposure that I was talking about, the noise reduction process. So it's gonna be here for another 40 seconds, and then hopefully we'll get our final image here on the screen. All right, so we got the long exposure. It's nothing good, but it's just to show you as an example. And we can check the histogram just in case to make sure that it's well exposed. It looks good. So this is all that there is when it comes to long exposure with digital cameras. The only thing that I wanted to say just real quick, because this video is going to be really long, is that instead of using the settings that the camera is giving you and then use the tables to get the final exposure time after you put the ND filter, I like to start the other way around. For example, for shots that include water, I like to take exposures of between 30 seconds to a couple minutes. So depending on the subject, you want to start with that. You want to more or less know how long the exposure is going to be, and then go backwards from there. So you know that you're going to use an ND filter, for example, here 15 seconds, and you want 2 minutes or something like that. So you would use the tables to get the shutter speed that your camera should be giving you, and so you can adjust the other settings like the aperture and the ISO to get to that exposure time that you're looking for. Let's move to the Bronica. So as I mentioned before, now I have to change the step-up ring to use the same adapter ring. I mean, you could buy a bunch of these, one for each lens, and just leave them on all the time, but I know, I prefer to spend that money on film or something else, but it's up to you. And from here it's exactly the same as it was with the digital camera. The only difference that we have to take in account with film is something called reciprocity failure. And that's something that happens because film is not a machine, they are chemicals. So for the first, say, 1 second of the exposure, when the shutter opens and all the light is hitting the film, those chemicals work just fine for a little bit, work just fine for 1 second. After 1 second, they are less efficient. and they can gather less light than before. And after one more second, they gather even less light and they become even less efficient, and that gets much worse over time. It's not something linear, it's logarithmic. So that means in practice that if you're going to take long exposures of say 30 seconds of 1 minute, to get the proper exposure, to get the right amount of light on the film, to get a properly exposed image, you're gonna have to expand or extend that exposure for a much longer period of time. So with digital, we have the shutter speed that the camera is giving us. We use the ND filter and those tables to convert from that shutter speed to the one with the ND filter. And now we need to use another table to convert that shutter speed to the final exposure time due to the reciprocity failure. I have tables for HP5, FP4 has the same characteristics, so it shares the tables. I'm gonna leave them linked down below in the description. I have them too for Tri-X, even though I don't use that film. I don't know where I got them from. It was a website a few years ago. I'm sorry I cannot credit the author here, but I don't remember where I got them from. And they work pretty well for me, so that's what I've been using these years. And yeah, let me show you how I do it, even though it's pretty much the same. So here I'm gonna go backwards, as I mentioned before. Instead of starting with the settings that the line meter is giving me and go to the final shutter speed, I'm gonna start the other way around. So I'm gonna shoot a long exposure here for 7 minutes. That's not necessary at all, but there are people coming by all the time, so I don't want them to show up on the exposure, and 7 minutes should be enough for those people to be pretty much gone. And I know because I've used this is what the most common way I take long exposures with film, that if I get an exposure time or a reading of 1/500th of a second with the ND filter, the 15 stop ND filter, that is going to convert to 1 minute exposure, and with HP5 that is going to convert to 7 minutes. So that's something that I have already memorized because I've done it many times in the past. So most of my long exposures with film are 7 minutes, 7.5 minutes, because I'm using because the reading is 1/500th of a second and I'm using the 15 stop ND filter. I hope that makes sense. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm using HP5. I'm reading it at 400. I know that the shutter speed that I need is 1/500th of a second, so I just need to find the right aperture. So what I do here in my line meter app, I dial in the 400 ASA, 1/500th of a second, and then I measure the light here, and it's giving me an aperture of f20. So that's what I have to dial in here in my lens to get the 1/500th. That's gonna convert to 1 minute after putting the ND filter, and it's gonna convert to 7 minutes after the reciprocity failure compensation. So as before, we need to focus, compose the shot, and all that kind of stuff beforehand. And an aperture of f20, it doesn't really matter. I just leave it to infinity because everything is gonna be in focus. So yeah. And now remember that this Bronica has a bulb mode, but it uses battery. It drains the battery, so I don't want to have this camera using battery for 7 minutes. So I'm gonna use the T mode on the lens. It's just a little thing here that you can pull down, and now it's in T mode. So now when you press the shutter, it's gonna be open and exposing the film for as long as you have that thingy down. When you finish the exposure, you just have to press it again and it's done. No battery used at all, so you can take exposures for like 15 hours, 15 days, 15 months, it doesn't matter. The camera is not gonna be using battery, so that's pretty awesome about this camera and why I prefer it over digital for long exposures. Okay, now that it's focused, I just put the ND filter on here and everything is pretty much ready. I could do the mirror lock up to avoid vibration of the camera, but to be honest, it's not necessary because in a 7-minute long exposure, a little bit of vibration at the beginning or at the end is not gonna matter at all because yeah, it's so long that it doesn't matter. So I'm just gonna do it. Okay, and now we just need to wait 7.5 minutes. Okay, so we are done here. There is nothing else that I can show you, but I still want to talk about a couple more things. So let's go back home because it's very noisy here. It's better to do it there. Alright, so that was a lot of talking, a lot of information too. I hope that you at least have the very basics of long exposure photography now. I just wanted to mention one thing or talk about one thing is because many people think that digital is better for long exposures because of the reciprocity failure property or problem with film, but I do believe that digital is much worse for a simple reason. The first one is that the sensor heats up, as I mentioned, that creates noise. So effectively you have to double your exposure time, and that is a big problem because with film your exposure time increases too, but you are actually taking the photo. So once it's over, you can right away start your next exposure. You cannot do that with digital. And the other problem is that digital cameras use power, and that can be a big deal if you are doing like a very long exposure, like 10-15 hours, something like that. If you're doing it with film, you just leave the camera alone and you just go to sleep. I've done it in the past and it's pretty awesome, works. And yeah, I just think that film is much better for long exposure photography, but it's completely doable with digital as well. You can make it work no matter what. So yeah, just remember that you can download my ebook following the link in the description down below. I also have links to all this camera gear in the description. And yeah, leave a comment if you have any question about anything here, or send me an email. I will do my best to get back to you. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.